Elizabeth Sena-Martin, Ely. I've known Ely since, I don't even know what year it would have been, Ely.
Long time.
Yeah, but she and I connected when she came from the Dominican Republic, her home, to the University of Evansville. And you've been here ever since. We're so thrilled. I've been part of your life. You've been part of mine for years. Ely is currently consulting, right? You've got your degree from Harvard, and you like to work with curriculum, don't you?
I do. Yeah. Among other things.
Among other things, do a lot of stuff. So Ely has recently gotten her certification in this knowledge works worldview.
Join the meeting.
We got it. Everybody, if you're jumping on, you can mute everybody so that we don't have any interference here, other than the remodeling going on in my home. But beyond that, we appreciate you muting. So you're going to hear tonight about Intercultural Intelligence Framework from Worldview. Ely's just recently been certified in it and shared it with me. And I thought it was really impactful. It just broadened my view again of the world, helped me understand that not everybody thinks like I do. And that sometimes the way I view the world is very limiting. So I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Ely to you and this really neat information. Ely, is there anything else I really didn't touch on that you need to share with everybody? Because you're fantastic.
Well, thanks, Denise. I do love Denise. I love Sarita as well. Having worked recently at Oakland City University, I can vouch for her awesomeness. And I would say that this intercultural intelligence framework was very useful to me, even as a, as an immigrant and as a person of color living in the United States right now. It did expand my view of the world, and I arrived at this place through my work at Oakland City University and thinking about a way to think about inclusion and diversity work and equity work from a different place than the normal conversations, which tend to be polarizing. I struggle with polarizing conversations myself. I like a good discussion and debate, but that is not always the best way to connect with people. So I have learned a lot through this process, and I connected with Denise as one of my guinea pigs as I was exploring this framework through coaching. And I think it's been helpful for expanding worldview. So I share this with you, not as a, super qualified practitioner, but someone who's just started on this path and is learning a lot and is sharing about learning myself and see the utility for others, especially in our community, which I know you are invested in building it to be more inclusive. So I share this with you as a, hey, come and find out this that I have learned, and wouldn't it be cool to learn more about it together in that spirit. So with that said, I'll jump right into our conversation today. The first thing that I like to share about this framework is what it says about intercultural intelligence. So there's lots of different words people use to talk about cultural competence, whether we hear some buzzwords about diversity and equity and inclusion or being culturally agile. But what does it mean? What does it mean to have intercultural intelligence? How does it compare to, say, emotional intelligence or other intelligences we talk about? And this framework is from a company called Worldview, and they specialize in helping individuals and organizations uncover kind of the hidden parts about cultures to foster what they call new cultural spaces or third culture spaces, where people who have different preferences and backgrounds can work together for common goals. So they define intercultural intelligence as that ability to create new cultural spaces that facilitate solutions that work for everyone, so win-win solutions, by anticipating, correctly interpreting, and adjusting to culturally defined behaviors. So this is one particular way of seeing the world of diversity and inclusion and equity, which is based upon thinking of each other's preferences And as I talk a little bit more about this framework, you will learn a little bit more about what that means, but this provides a frame for thinking about being culturally competent. This is not about a particular set of skills or values only or behaviors only, but kind of a way of seeing the world towards promoting new cultural spaces. And with that in mind, I also like to start this conversation by talking about the knowledge works approach, which I find very effective. And it is trying to help people move from awareness to adaptation. So at first, there's just developing that awareness of there's different ways of seeing the world, almost like a spotlight. So using the intercultural intelligence framework as a light to shine around the world. And then from that awareness comes another step of accepting. So, oh, I noticed some things are different than I thought. Is this true? If so, what are the consequences of that? And then moving towards adaptation. So what do I do differently, perhaps to have more constructive interactions or relationships, or build on the work that's been done for inclusion or diversity, or just organizational learning and community work. And as I've learned from this approach, I realized that these are not automatic stages, and it takes everybody different pathways to navigate through these levels. So I know that there are things I'm aware of that I'm battling and struggling to accept. I kind of see that they're there, but I still don't kind of want to admit they're true. I'm still thinking my old way. And then there are things that I've become aware of, I've accepted. And now the question is, will I adapt, or will I still continue to pretend or try to change it? As no, that really can't be. I don't like it that way. And I think that's a very human perspective. And I think it can apply to everything, including this idea of building cultural spaces that are inclusive. I don't think of it as a shaming thing of, if people can move fast from awareness to adaptation, it is because they're terrible people or what is wrong with them. I think this is a normal human nature process for all of us as we interact with the world and learn. So as a big learner myself, I like approaches that present us humans as learners. We don't have it figured out, and it takes some steps, some conscious steps to get to that place of understanding. So continuing on to the knowledge works idea, they've developed some tools for that process of developing awareness, acceptance, and adaptations related to culture. And two of their tools and kind of mini frameworks are the 3 colors of worldview, which I'll talk a little bit more about today as an entry point. And then they also have the cultural mapping inventory, which is another tool for learning about 12 dimensions of culture. So whereas the 3 colors of worldview is kind of oh, hey, consider how the world might be different in these 3 kinds of ways. The cultural mapping inventory is a much deeper dive into cultural differences. And some of these are known to us from, pop culture about different cultures and how they see status or how they think that people should act. Many of these things, as I engaged with it, I realized, oh, I know about that. I think about, Dominicans dressing for church being very formal versus Americans dressing for church might be more informal. So we've known some of these and we interact with them, but these tools just kind of help us hone in on those differences to build that awareness and then acceptance and potentially adapting to be in a world that shares space with different cultural points of view. And I would say that's the biggest nugget in here, is that developing that awareness of the differences to move towards accepting the differences and then adapting, not necessarily believing like other people or acting like other people, but just realizing the difference across individuals and then acting in a way that honors that, which I think is a very good basis for inclusion and building spaces where many different kinds of people can feel like they belong. And so perhaps here I'll be preaching to the choir, but I definitely like to start with the why, why bother with intercultural intelligence at this point in time? And on the most kind of utilitarian point of view, of course, we know that these are skills that are important for employment and for future jobs. This is just a list of the top 10 most important skills that Forbes was predicting would be important in 2020. This is, of course, before the pandemic. So I find it the researcher in me is very excited to have seen this and then gone, oh, if we had only known in October of 2019 what it was going to be like. But many of these are connected to that idea of intercultural intelligence and being able to identify cultural differences and navigate them well. Even things like critical thinking that we might think have to do with, just cold facts and learning to discern things is impacted by intercultural intelligence because our culture impacts the way we see the world. So from this list, I see critical thinking, I see adaptability and flexibility, creativity, emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence and diversity, leadership skills, judgment and complex decision-making, collaboration and self-management are all connected to how we see culture and how we engage with it in ourselves and in others. So that's a pretty large amount of these top 10 skills that are connected to that understanding of culture and intercultural intelligence. And similarly from the World Economic Forum, looking internationally at what our top 10 skills for 2025. Many of these are also related to being able to understand our own cultural preferences and how we engage with others in that sense, not just in a psychological, I'm an introvert or an extrovert point of view. And then more contextualized as a person who grew up in a different country and have lived here now more of my life in the United States in another culture, I find the trends too in American culture and this question about trust. So this is research from 2018, but I think that it's still very applicable. That question about declining levels of trust within our society, which growing up in a different country, I found Americans very trusting of their community, very involved in their community in a different way than where I grew up. We definitely had strong community, but it was different. I would say it's true that Americans in general trust each other to do things right or well together, but that has presented some issues over the past few years. And when researchers have explored this question about why are Americans maybe trusting each other less, what I see a lot of the categories or factors listed here, of course, this is during the Trump presidency, so it's mentioned here, has to do with the way in which we interpret other people's culture ourselves and how we think things are going based on our own cultural preference. So whenever I see, what are the reasons why there's less trust, and people say things like, oh, other people are lazy or greedy or dishonest or untrustworthy, millennials are a particular problem. As a millennial myself, I'm thinking, well, that depends on how you define all these things. How do you define being lazy or greedy or untrustworthy? The way I think about it and interpret it is framed by my culture and is very different from what other people might think. So I see intercultural intelligence and how we understand culture as kind of an underlying theme that can also support these conversations about just building stronger communities. And can we trust each other? Can we work together with the trust that is required for that? And that we would have, each other's back in our community. So with that kind of big why in mind, and knowing that we've experienced a lot since 2018 and even 2019 as a country and around the world, I think that understanding culture has become that much more important for us now than it was then. And so I like the tools and the framework from Knowledge Works for amplifying that view of the world and for understanding culture. And this culture wheel is something that many different organizations and kind of leadership programs and trainings explore in thinking about culture this way. And some of these categories, I'm sure everybody thinks of when they think of culture, what do you eat? What music do you like? What are some techniques or skills? What are traditions, the languages we speak? We immediately see, oh yeah, these mean culture. What we might not realize, some of these concepts like our values and the way in which we translate those into knowledge and stories or the way in which our community interact are also part of our culture. And so thinking about culture in this way, we realize there's a lot in the bottom of the cultural iceberg that we might not be noticing, or that we might not be able to understand by just looking at the top. So the observable elements of culture, you know, what people like to eat or the music they listen to is a tiny piece of what a person's culture and cultural preferences are. There's attitudes, there's norms and values, there's beliefs about the world that are deep in the water there, that you only get to know about people from interacting with them and getting to know them at a deeper level. And this also points out to the fact that the way we look may obscure many other underlying cultural preferences about who we are. And we tend to think of culture perhaps as skin color or ethnic backgrounds or languages or countries of origin. But the truth is, even within people who grew up in the same country or even who grew up in the same family, cultural preferences differ in these deeper levels. And that's something I've learned just from having siblings and growing up and realizing as adults, we value different things. We grew up in the same place and time with the same parents, but we have beliefs about how we're shaping our lives that are different. And I would say that is true of everybody as well. So exploring deeper into culture helps us to think about interacting with people when we only see the tip of the iceberg. And knowledge works, and this ICI framework helps with that. And I would say as a last kind of point of highlight here is that we don't realize how much culture impacts the way we see, think, and act. So we are used to thinking about psychological preferences. You know, I'm an introvert, so I get tired when I'm around with people. Oh, he's an extrovert talking all the time. That's just how they are, and we learn to accept those differences. But culture seems to be the water we swim in, and we tend to think about our cultural preferences as universal. I value these things. That's what everybody should value. I believe these things. Those are the important things that everybody should believe. Of course, these are the real truths for everybody. And I'm not thinking here about, you know, moral right or wrong. I'm thinking about cultural preferences like, do I want to do things always kind of by the book and outline all the stipulations in a contract? That would be me. Do I plan it all out and it's like black and white and that's the way it should be? Or, you know, some people are more like, well, that's my friend, and yeah, we'll talk about a business relationship. We'll come up with a plan. We'll try it out. Then we'll divide up work as we go. That makes me very anxious. I don't know about that way of doing things. But for some people, the way I do it with the black and white and the contract feels very off-putting and not quite right. So in navigating those preferences that we might not see, we are better at, again, creating cultural spaces where people can interact and be themselves and also promote win-win solutions. So should we do the contract Ellie's way or other people's way? That should be a conversation of the people involved, so that it can be as best as possible in the context. So I'm going to pause here. I've talked very generally about culture, about intercultural intelligence and what it means, about why we should care about it right now, kind of our predisposition to perhaps not see these things on our own without some additional help. And I'm going to pause here for questions or comments, since we're not in a face-to-face format where we could easily respond non-verbally. Any quick thoughts or reactions to what I've been talking about so far? And you can pop thoughts in the chat or you can unmute and talk.
Ellie, I love just this kind of information because it just pops our lids a little bit and makes us think broader. So I always, of course, come back to LE Community Leadership Program, our retreats, and just this kind of information, I think, just builds compassion. Have you found that to be true? Or
Well, I think it makes me way more compassionate, if only by realizing how much I don't know myself, and realizing that if I struggle sometimes to even know what my preferences are, but I can be judgy towards other people, then I should have compassion for other people trying to make sense of situations as well. So yeah.
So true. Yeah, good stuff. Thank you.
I'm not as empathetic as you, Denise. I know that, but this helps me. Any other thoughts or questions or comments?
Feel free to utilize the chat too, even as Ely continues on. I'll help you with that. I'll keep track of it.
I like how you also brought up the psychological preferences. Like, I totally resonate with what you said about the boxes and the black and white. And then, you know, a lot of, my cat, a lot of people, so I have to keep turning my video and everything off. There's a cat. You know, that's also, it's very similar to a cultural thing, but like what is normal inside your head is not normal inside other people's heads. Mm-hmm. And that's just like a personality thing, or like psychological.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, the definition of normal is something to be pondered about in general. But this is one way to expand what could fit into the category of normal, and realizing just that categories of normal are so varied. It really takes a long time to adapt, you know, to accept that reality, you know, not just be aware, but to really act in that way, to realize the discomfort of the slightly different way. Because it feels abnormal to us, but acknowledge that that's just the normal, that we would feel like, oh, this is different from me. That is the normal. People are different from us. And that gives a sense of peace too, I think, in navigating relationships, to expect it to be different rather than expect that it needs to be normal. And that's when it is good. I think for me, definitely a growth point. Any other thoughts or
Ely, I love that this feels so just well thought out and researched. It's not just based on how somebody feels, and not that feeling isn't important too, mm-hmm. but there's that other side that I think is so important. I also feel that this kind of gives us permission to be curious. And say, I want to learn more. I don't know enough about this. To feel like that's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. If I say, Ely, tell me about, you know, how does this work in your country, or what are the traditions, or how is this different from one part of your country to another, all that kind of thing. And I think sometimes when we can take the chance and have the courage to be curious with a love heart behind it, we can make a lot of mistakes and giggle about it. Then it's better than if we don't talk. You know, if we don't talk and we're just trying to guess. Guessing usually doesn't work out very well in any relationship. Yeah. So anyway, I love what you're doing. This is really good. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Any other quick thoughts before I keep kind of expanding on this idea? And that point about being a cultural learner and curious is a big kind of piece of this conversation as well. We'll come up here in a little bit. Then feel free to pop things in the chat like Denise mentioned as we go, as things, anything aha moments or anything that you disagree with too, and saying, what about this or what about that, Ely? I enjoy discussion and debate. It will not be off-putting to me at all. So then I would say the darker side of not engaging with intercultural intelligence is that kind of lack of depth of perception. So we've all been in that place where we thought we knew what was going on, only to realize terribly later that we had misjudged the whole situation. I can vouch for myself so many times, both good and bad. I've thought something is bad and realized it wasn't as bad. And also that I thought something was good and it was really not what I thought. And I think Chimamanda in this video, it has the link here, and I would share it with the PowerPoint afterwards. what she talks about, that danger of the single story and not having an expanded view of the world, is that we can really fall into the traps of stereotype and misjudging both people and situations in ways that are both at loss to us and to other people. So if intercultural intelligence helps us create cultural spaces for win-win, lack of intercultural intelligence then traps us into some relationships and no-win positions, because the truth of life is that we are different and have cultural preferences. So she explores kind of how our culture can put us and the rest of the world in boxes and just see one side of people, one story about people, whereas we need to have that expanded view. And we miss out a lot on life, and we also can create more pain in life for people when we are only looking at them from one point of view, right? To our conversation earlier on normal. And that's a video definitely worth watching in all its fullness, which we don't.
Ellie, how long is that video? I don't remember.
I would say 35 minutes, maybe. It feels so much shorter because she's a great storyteller. It is a TED Talk, but it highlights very well those ideas about if you only see people from the single story, narrow point of view, you are missing so much more. And some groups more than others have experienced the pain of being seen only from that one single story view, but it happens everywhere. She talks about growing up in Nigeria and then coming to the States, being seen as the single version of the Nigerian and how that impacted her, but herself having single story views of Mexican immigrants from media and not understanding that. I would say, as someone who immigrated, I've been on both sides. I've been on the side of being interpreted from the one single point of view as, you know, you look like a brown person, or you know, you're a Latina and you have an accent, you know, one version, single story. And me also, as someone from another country, seeing American people as a one monolithic group of, here's what Americans do. And that's just very narrow-minded, as I've come to live here much longer. From one initial point of view, I remember thinking high school was going to look like Dawson's Creek. That totally dates me. But then I started teaching here in high school in Evansville, and what a rude awakening. Life is not like life in the United States is not like Dawson's Creek. I even lived in Massachusetts, and I know it is not even like Dawson's Creek in Massachusetts. So those single stories happen to all of us. So expanding our view is helpful for not living in those stereotypes. And two of the things that this way of thinking helps is that we can think about learning more about these cultural preferences so that we can be those learners and have curiosity, as Lynn brought up, and not be cultural critics. And then also on the flip side, learning to pause and question our assumptions and see multiple interpretations, both of which require training. As human beings, we are not really trained to necessarily question ourselves at every point. Some of our systems are automatic and it helps us survive the day-to-day, but it doesn't help us have good relationships with the different people. So the two little images here, being a chameleon versus being a food critic, are some ways to remember and think about that. So in terms of the actual framework, and I'll do a little peek into what it means and what it provides for one of the tools to get really, really deep into these worldviews and explore first yourself, right? Instead of learning to judge others, first to explore preferences. I would say we need to take the assessment, you know, do the little quiz, learn about which worldview is your primary and secondary, do some of that introspection. So I'm just sharing with you out here at the top of the iceberg, some of these ideas to create some awareness, knowing that to really go deeper into adapting, you'd have to spend some more time with this. But I love talking about it. And this idea of the worldview encompasses more than just intercultural work, but we think of worldviews as lenses and ways to see the world. So if our worldview is tinted pink, we're going to see the world in rose-colored glasses, as they say. But perhaps our worldview really has blue glasses or a different color. We're going to see everything based on that. So whatever we are wearing as our worldview, whatever it is, and it is there, will color our perception. So this tool of the 3 colors of worldview, the assessment and kind of the framing of the different colors, is one way to start to play with different colored glasses, so to speak. So if my typical worldview and glasses are pink, I'm going to try on the blue ones and see what does the world look like in blue, and realize there's people around me that see the world in blue. When I see pink, they see blue. When I see blue, they see purple. You know, different kinds of versions of the world. So trying to learn from yourself first, and then from others people's perspectives. And this kind of, you know, how do you get to this place of having rose-colored glasses or blue, or seeing the world in a particular way, is part of our upbringing and socialization. It's also part of what we choose as we get older. Like I mentioned, growing up in the same family, you may be socialized in similar ways, but you still have personal preferences and things you choose. You know, I choose to believe this, I choose to believe that. My personal experiences in my family lead me down this path. And so our culture gets shaped by those interactions with people around us until we start to use that frame to analyze the world and future activities. And so because we're shaped by that culture and those experiences, we see the world a particular way, then we make decisions about what's happening based on our perception. So if I see out there and I perceive with my glasses that the situation is good, I will act in one way, versus if I perceive this is not so good, I will act in different ways. If I think this is normal and good, there's one path. And if I don't, that's a different path. So learning to be able to see the world through different colors and worldviews is helpful in judging correctly what is really happening, what is really going on there that we may not see otherwise. And I like from this particular framework, there's many different ways that they could frame this, that it acknowledges at the deeper level, we're talking with those 3 colors of worldview about what people see as the truth of the world, what they believe in. This is very, very deep in there. People may not change that preference throughout their lives. So it's a particular bend or preference we have. We can learn to see from other points of view, but we will always have kind of that home place. And that's okay. This is not about, oh, I'm blue and I'm trying to be more yellow, or I'm purple and I wish I were blue because blue is better. This is not about what's better or worse, but about how are you seeing the world, and can you see it in different ways, since there are people around you who are seeing it in different ways and acting like that. And so the framework is very clear about all 3 colors are present in every person and in different groups, but there are preferences that start getting socialized into groups. So I might say something like, you know, as a Dominican, I think this way. I grew up in a culture that kind of prioritized or said this was better or more normal than this other color. And so it's good to know we all have the different preferences. Some things get highlighted as common or better. And then all of them have to do with how we react to the environment and how we think about other people's behavior and our own behavior. So it's very practical in that it impacts how we see and what we do. With kind of all that framing the conversation, the 3 kind of worldviews that are in this framework, connected from research, from anthropology and some other social sciences, are honor, shame, power, fear, and innocence, guilt. And again, I'm doing the very, very high level view here to kind of bring up some of the characteristics and hopefully pique your curiosity and interest in these worldviews. But each one of these sees the world in a particularly different way. So if, for example, I am a primary innocence, guilt, worldview person, this is my preferred method of the world. When I talk about a contract with all the bullets and black and white, I feel so at home there. That is what I like. I think that is normal and good for everyone. If I don't watch myself, I'm always evaluating situations with those purple lenses of we gotta do the right thing. What the right thing is very clear. It's very black and white. If I perceive from that point of view, we're not doing the right thing, I'm gonna be uncomfortable. I'm gonna have trouble. I'm going to think something's terribly going wrong. And I'm going to try to stay out of that guilty feeling and into the innocent side of innocence guilt. That's going to be Ellie most of her time if she's just being Ellie without thinking about other people around or other ways of seeing the world. And that's kind of I feel very comfortable there. I have to challenge myself to question assumptions and to see the world in other colors. So if I migrate up to the kind of blue, green, turquoise color of honor, shame, that particular view of the world values the relationships more than the right and wrong. Are people being honored? Are we trying to minimize shame? I'm not going to highlight the points of the contract that are really good or really bad, because you and I are friends. And of course, we're going to be honorable towards each other. That's a whole different way of seeing the world and evaluating situations. I think growing up in the Dominican Republic, my family felt very much this do the right thing at all times. But my culture was more, well, but the right thing depends on who you are with and how that's going to affect the people you love and your family and your community. So it's not just about the contract. You got to think about your people. That's a very, in my upbringing, that was something that I interacted all the time. So I was constantly dancing between kind of that perspective of do the right thing and it's black and white and outside standard, to think about the people and the relationships and how's that going to affect. So Dominicans are known for, breaking the rules and cutting in line if you have a real reason to cut in line, or just the reason being that your friends are ahead in the line. And of course they want to bring you along. So if your friend wasn't further on the line, you got to go back. That's not a shameful thing. That's just the way it works. And nobody will bat an eye or think that's terrible. That's just a good thing about having good friends and living in community. So again, different ways of seeing the world and exploring different situations that sound different to us depending on what our preferences are. And then moving to the kind of the yellow lens of the world, the power fear, that can be a tricky one to explore because some of us have negative associations with power if we've seen it used poorly, but on the happy side, on the right side of that worldview is the idea of the power we all have to be empowering and life-giving, or to instill fear and anxiety and use that for our advantage negatively. So each one of these worldviews has that happy side and the shadow side of how it could go wrong. So folks with that preference of power fear are very, very good about noticing who's disenfranchised, who's marginalized, whose voices have not been heard. How can we build on that? And how can we grow multiple perspectives into decision-making on the happy side? On the negative side, that way of seeing the world is also about how do I maintain power for my group or for myself, and can get pretty negative in terms of manipulating situations to be in power. So again, different priorities, different ways of evaluating what is happening, different ways of choosing how to act based on that way of seeing the world, that lens. But as I discussed, these are part of all of us. Sometimes we have choices to be empowering or to grab power for ourselves and be selfish about it. We have chances to honor others or to shame other people all the time. And we have chances also to evaluate what's happening in terms of, am I doing the right thing by external views, or can I, try to use guilt to get what I want out of other people? So in all of these, we are learning about ways of seeing the world and how we are interpreting things, how others are interpreting things, to negotiate relationships and actions. And I would say that once you think about these internally, like you take the assessment, you realize your primary color, you start thinking about what it would look like in other settings, what other people think, then you can explore that curiosity that Lynn mentioned and become a cultural learner and think about, well, what does this particular situation look like to someone who's looking at it from an honor shame point of view? And what might that mean if my business partner or my spouse or my in-laws see the world that way versus me, who sees the world a different way, and what that might bring for relationships and community. And it is kind of impossible to unsee them. Denise can be also kind of a witness to that. I remember the first time I started thinking about it, and trying to figure out why I had made choices in the past, and thinking, oh, is this really my way of seeing the world? All kinds of things I hadn't seen before or noticed or thought before, all of a sudden kind of came to the foreground, and I could say, oh, this is why I had so much trouble with this or that situation. Or, oh, no wonder I thought that was terrible, but all the people around me thought that was just fine. So I think it is something that can be used in many different ways, but especially for that self-knowledge and then the relationships with others. So I'm going to pause here before I talk any more about these. Again, talked for a long time, and hear some comments or reactions or questions about what these worldviews are, and the specific ones of honor, shame, power, fear, or innocence, guilt.
So would you say, okay, so I'm from Colombia, and part of the culture in Colombia is that we are very prideful. I was telling this to Denise earlier. In general, the culture, we are very prideful, and we want to just show that we're like our honor, you know, that we don't want to be shameful, or we don't want to be shamed or anything like that. And so if we are going through something, like if we are going through any kind of problem, we just don't mention it, or or we hide it, we push it down. And it kind of shows every time we do something. Like, okay, if I am going to show you a part of my life, I'm going to leave out the negative side of it. So would you say that kind of honor and shame color view, it goes with pride as well? Or is that like something about like fear? More of like we try to avoid the negative side, so we end up following the other like positive side of the color view.
Yeah. I would say it depends on the situation. I could see pride from any of these, you know, worldview colors. I could tell you from my purple primary innocence guilt, I also don't like to highlight anything that is remotely making me look guilty, because that makes me feel uncomfortable. So I think that our things like pride or our personality characteristics, things that are good and bad, show up in different ways depending on the worldview, you know. Whereas you might be thinking of it in honor and shame, I might think of it as feeling guilty or feeling innocent. And I might say, well, but if revealing my weakness allows me to look like I'm not guilty because at least I told you I was wrong, I feel good again, you know. So that's a different interaction of pride from my corner of the world. That might be different from your perspective. So recognizing, is Ellie being proud here, or she, you know, it takes on a nuance there from different points of view. And again, I could see you as like only sharing positive things as, well, but Sarita's a great person. I might not even think about the hiding of shame and how that might happen on the other side, because I don't even think of the world that way unless I purposefully explore honor, shame, because that's not my corner of the world, my preference. But I can understand you better, and then realize there may be times when Sarita's not sharing all kinds of problems because she doesn't want to be ashamed. And if I'm going to be a good friend, I have to learn how to be there for her when she doesn't tell me, right? That could be
right. I mean,
an application.
It's not like I want to hide things because of shame. It's just how the culture has raised me to be, I guess. It's just like my mom always says, we have to, you know, be formal and be, you know, show our good side, good people. And then at the house, if I did something wrong, she's like, why did you do that? Like, don't ever do that again. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was wrong, kind of thing. But I mean, I don't do it purposefully. It's just it's enhanced in me, I guess.
Yeah, and that's how culture works, and now we get the wiring, and we kind of get on autopilot, and it takes us learning and adapting to know there could be even other ways of being and doing. For the sake of other people, I would say I feel quite comfortable with my preference, but then when I interact with other people, I realize I got to think about the other ways too.
Ellie, is there a piece of this that we shouldn't put our lens on other people's reaction? So if Sarita is going to only tell me the good things, I don't need to look at that and say, well, she withheld the bad, like, you know what I mean? Like she's withholding the bad from me, right? She neglect. So I think it's more too about not interpreting other people's actions from your lens, but from their lens. Right. So now that I know this, if this happens with Sarita at LE, I can say, oh, she's telling me the good, and that's the cultural response. And I would probably be very careful about mining the bad. Like I'd say, Sarita, it's okay. Let's go in the corner and whisper. But did something happen? We can talk about it. You know, so it's not public, right?
Yes.
So.
Well, but what I was like telling Denise earlier is, if you ask me about it, I will not hide it. I mean, I'm not a dishonest person. You know, if you touch on that topic, I will talk about it. And, you know, the conversation starts, and, you know, if there's a debate, then there's a debate and we argument our points of view. But it's not like I am purposefully just hiding the bad stuff from you, you know? So it's just basically like for another person to me making the right questions, or you're, you know, asking me the right questions, I guess, because I'm not just going to give you all the information if you don't want it.
Yeah. And I think that connects well to Lynn's point about, we got to think about, well, Sarita's behaving as Sarita would, not, well, she should have behaved this way or that way, because that's how I think of the world. So thinking of the person and their behavior with their preferences. The way we do it many times with personalities or, you know, learning styles. Teachers do this all the time. Oh, this student's a visual learner, I give him pictures. Or this one's an auditory learner, he learns better with songs or doing. We don't think, oh, you should learn better with pictures. I'm not going to help you with that. This is the right way. You know, we interpret and support people where they're coming from, but we don't tend to think necessarily of culture that way. Things like how I handle pride or things I do wrong seem to be like, we don't talk about it, or it's concealing information. We have a lot more judgment stances toward it on the cultural side. Other thoughts or comments or connections? These are all kind of good illustrations to talk about the three colors. Well, it sounds like either we've explained them well, or we're still just at the top of the iceberg and there's a whole lot more underneath. It is hard to talk about these without exploring oneself and making sense of which one is my preference. And that helps you realize, oh, there's other ways. Other people think of it differently from there. I think I've learned a lot from, as I've worked with people on this, learning people who have other preferences, just really asking them, what does this seem like to you? And what do you think about that? And how would you react to the situation? And being amazed at all the rich conversation that ensues from that, simply by learning about other ways of seeing things.
Ellie, this has been absolutely wonderful learning and easy to apply. I mean, it's just such a good method of getting the point across. I really want to thank you for doing this for us. It's absolutely wonderful.
And I would say if you're curious and you want to learn more, whenever I'm going to share this PowerPoint with Denise, and I don't know how you guys share in your network afterwards, but there's some links here. Knowledge Works website has a lot of resources. I also linked here just a short overview of the framework and the assessments and tools. And then if you want to take a test and kind of debrief it and learn more about it and be pleasantly surprised about things, you can contact me and we can go deeper down that rabbit hole. It's very fun, I think.
Yeah, it is
to
very
learn about it.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's very fun. And Ellie, I would love to offer the that video to everyone, because that is really impactful. She does a great job of kind of opening up some more insight there for sure. This is great work. Yeah. We appreciate you so much.
And the link for the video is in the PowerPoint itself. So however you guys share with the network, people will have access to it there.
Okay. I think that Liz or Sarita will be able to work their magic. Lynn and I will just talk about it. You know, they got the power, right? Great. Okay, my dear, you are fantastic. We appreciate you so much. Thank you for the good work you're doing to open our minds and our hearts. Everybody, don't forget to check out the chat for Voice for the Community Leadership Program. And don't forget the radio show on Saturday mornings. Okay. Thanks, Ellie. You've really made a difference tonight.
Oh, thanks.
Everybody.
Bye. Thanks for the opportunity.